With the Borg a clear and present danger, and the Dominion breathing down their neck, Starfleet Command would decide on an unconventional approach to bolster their fleet. And as if by magic, the Curry class would be born. But what do we know about this unusual starship class? Well, today we'll find out. Hello and welcome to another episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon, a Star Trek web series that dives into the history of any given topic using beta canon sources and my own imagination to fill in the gaps. In today's episode, we're taking a look at the Curry class as first seen in Star Trek Deep Space Nine to better understand its place in Star Trek history. Please note, technically, this is an update video to one I did when I started this channel. Back then, I didn't use 3D models at all, fleshing the Curry class out with photos I had found online, and of course I didn't use any beta canon information. Thus, when I began using Star Trek Online's demo record to provide earlier 3D views of starships, I pulled this one down, vowing that one day, when I could get a 3D model of the class, I'd return to fully flesh out this interesting design. And now, thanks to Captain Whitmire, I can fulfill my promise. So be sure to give this wonderful 3D modeler some loving and click the link in the description below. But of course, and as always, because this is just a beta canon video, all information relayed should pretty much be taken with a grain of stardust and only considered a little bit of Star Trek fun. And so, with all that out of the way, let's begin. Next to the Borg Collective, the Dominion was seen as almost an equal threat to the Federation. And being very worried, Starfleet Command began to assemble a task force to deal with this possible threat in late 2370. By 2372, the Klingon Empire and the United Federation of Planets were once again in a state of shaky diplomatic relations. And although this break in strong diplomatic ties and the dissolution of the Khitomer Accords would only be temporary, the idea of being picked apart by both the Empire and the Dominion had frightened Starfleet Command so much that they'd begun to look at out-of-the-box solutions to solve their starship fleet problems. With new technologies being developed and implemented throughout the Federation to combat the Borg, Starfleet had begun to design very strong yet complex starships to replace some of the aging classes within the fleet. But with construction times of these new classes increased, as well as these new technologies still needing some shakedown time, Starfleet's best and brightest engineers and starship design teams came up with a brilliant plan. Taking inventory of all Starfleet's decommissioned and salvage yards, Starfleet's task force immediately began pulling ships out of those yards, adding new weaponry and power systems as well as updated computer cores, bringing these starships online to bolster their fleet numbers. But Starfleet still had another problem. They didn't have enough carrier starships to transport Starfleet's fighters into battle, which these fighters were easily constructed. Looking at the large number of Excelsior-class parts and dead hulks in the shipyards, the task force came up with the idea of reconfiguring that standard design and converting it into a starship class they could really use, and in 2373, the Curry class would be born. Sitting at a length of approximately 384 meters, the Curry class would be designed to be operated by 290 officers and crew members, with additional space for 500 fighter pilots. Though discarded saucers and secondary hulls of the Excelsior class from days gone by were readily available, one common thread that was missing in the shipyards were the class's nacelles, as they themselves had been recycled into newer Excelsior-class starships as they were built. One of the most common questions asked about these decommissioned Excelsior-class vehicles has always been why they were discarded in the first place, and not just refit and kept in service. Since the Excelsior-class's relaunch after the failed transwarp experiment, many changes to starship construction and the materials used to make them had occurred, and as a result, these discarded hulls of the Excelsior class were technically inferior to the later constructed versions of the class. Hence, Starfleet's mass decommissioning of these ships in the 2320s and 2330s. Facing a lack of nacelles for the class, however, presented a new problem for Starfleet's engineers, one they would solve by turning to yet another discarded class in the yards, the Constitution-class refit, installing those nacelles into the Curry class. As a result, however, the Curry class would be a far slower vessel of the era, with a standard safe cruising speed of only warp factor 5, and an emergency maximum speed of warp 8.4 for 12-hour increments. Tactically, the Curry class's dual phaser emitter banks would be quickly updated to match technologies of the time, with its torpedo launching systems also receiving a similar upgrade. Shielding for the class would also be standard for the time. By reconfiguring the components of the Excelsior class, the Curry class would indeed make a great starship design as a carrier class. By moving the Excelsior class's secondary hull almost completely under the saucer section of the ship, Starfleet's task force found that the Curry class's secondary hull itself could act as a landing pad, while the saucer section acted as added protection to allow the fighters to launch or be recalled during the heat of combat. Moving the secondary hull under the saucer section also had the added bonus of decreasing the starship's profile, allowing for a much smaller defensive shield bubble. This meant less power was required to defend the starship, and allowed this class to stay in a firefight much longer than its Excelsior-class counterpart. With an out-of-the-fire and into-the-frying-pan approach to its shakedown cruise, the Curry class would end up performing quite well during the Dominion War. However, in early 2374, the Curry herself would be one of the few surviving starships of the Second Fleet, having suffered massive damage, including a hull breach to its primary hull. Even so, Starfleet Command saw how well the USS Curry had held together during battle, and made the decision to tow the Curry back to a starbase to receive complete repairs and return the starship to active duty on the front lines. Once the war had ended in 2375, the class itself would be decommissioned en masse. Never intended to be a regular vessel design, the Curry class would be the first to be mothballed, in case further aggression would require their use again. This class's life, however, wasn't exactly over, or at least it wouldn't have been. Once Admiral Jean-Luc Picard had convinced Starfleet Command and the Federation Council to assist the Romulan Star Empire with its evacuation of the Romulan homeworld, the remaining ships of the Curry class were once again pulled out of mothballs, and preparations were made to include these vessels in a fleet of over 10,000 starships Starfleet was gathering for the mass evacuation. Unfortunately, when the Utopia Planitia shipyards of Mars were attacked by rogue synths, all the remaining vessels of this class were destroyed in that sneak attack, and although sadly no original Curry-class vessels remained intact, the design would in fact live on, with the launch of the Neo-Curry class early in the 25th century. The Neo-Curry class would prove itself as useful as the original class had been, heading out into the frontiers of Federation space, this time acting as an emergency response type class rather than a wartime carrier battleship. Created out of necessity, the Curry class would end up being a fondly remembered design from the Dominion War, with those who served on one of them ignoring her obvious flaws in favor of the Underdog principle, earning the Curry class its valiant and well-deserved place in Starfleet history. Thank you for watching today's episode of Truth or Myth Beta Canon. What do you think of the Curry class and the historical narrative that I've created here? Do you want to see more videos like this one? Well, leave your comments in the section below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, hitting that little bell icon so you won't miss a single video we release. And again, I'd like to take a moment just to thank Captain Whitmire for making this video possible. And do you want to help the channel throw together a starship design to beat back the Dominion? Then consider becoming a channel patron, a major help that allows this channel to purchase resources and 3D models to keep it going. The link to our Patreon account is in the description below. Thanks again for watching, live long, and prosper.